Revenge with Karen.
The moment the VP's son unboxed the Rolex, the whole room broke into forced applause like they were auditioning for a toothpaste commercial. You know that slow, polite clapping people do when they're too sober to fake enthusiasm? That. Everyone pretended it made sense. 23-year-old Ryan, fresh out of nowhere, standing under a string of Party City lights, while HR handed him a luxury watch like he cured cancer with a spreadsheet. And me, I got a $10 cafeteria voucher. Not even a card, just a sad little envelope like the kind dentists used to mail X-ray film. I opened it expecting at least a handwritten thanks for keeping us under budget, maybe even a company pen or a mug. Nope, $10. Just enough to buy 2 string cheeses and regret. I laughed, too hard maybe, loud enough that people turned, loud enough that the CFO caught my eye across the room and did that fake smile thing where only his teeth move. "You can't buy loyalty like that Rolex, huh?" he said, drink in hand, cheeks flushed with the kind of red that only comes from an open bar and lifelong arrogance. And in that moment, something calcified in me, like frost creeping across a windshield, quiet but consuming. I've been with this company 11 years. I've saved them more money than they even know how to count. I've restructured vendor contracts so tightly you couldn't wedge a post-it between the lines. I've worked weekends, missed birthdays, kept my mouth shut, while people like Ryan got fast-tracked for just being genetically adjacent to power. So yeah, I smiled back. I even raised my plastic wine cup and toasted Ryan as if I wasn't mentally listing every clause, every contact, every piece of leverage I'd tucked away over a decade. If they wanted theater, I'd give him Broadway. Oh, and if you're hearing this and thinking, damn, that's messed up, go ahead and tap that like button and hit subscribe. I know, every story says it, but trust me, it keeps us fueled through this corporate circus. Plus, you won't want to miss what happens when that Rolex turns out to be the world's most expensive boomerang. Anyway, back to the disaster. Ryan was all smiles, shaking hands, throwing out words like synergy and scalability, like confetti at a wedding he wasn't invited to. I stood near the back, near the dessert table, where dignity goes to die. And I watched him schmooze the execs like he'd earned every ounce of that attention. The same execs who have walked past my cubicle for years like I'm just part of the wallpaper. He didn't even glance at me, which was hilarious, considering he was now reporting to me, or so the org chart claimed. In reality, he'd been parachuted into procurement like a frat boy landing in the middle of a chess tournament. And suddenly, my inbox started looking different. Emails I should have been looped on were forwarded to me hours later, with edits. Pricing spreadsheets I'd locked down were reopened and tampered with. Vendors I had carefully negotiated with started responding oddly, like something was off. Like someone was promising them something I hadn't. First real red flag came from Yvette at Telconix, one of our major hardware suppliers. She replied to an email, one I hadn't even sent, with a confused "Are you sure this aligns with the Tier 2 volume commitment from last quarter?" Except I was sure, because I never made that promise, so I dug, and there it was. A thread I wasn't CC'd on. A pricing agreement draft sent from Ryan's email. My template, my structure, but edited, slashed, dumbed down, repackaged with his signature at the bottom. I didn't lose my temper. I saved everything. Screenshotted the email, archived the pricing doc, forwarded it to my personal account. Then I opened a folder on my desktop and titled it Leverage. I didn't know exactly where this was going yet, but I'd seen enough train wrecks to know when someone's dancing on the tracks with earbuds in. Ryan thought he was untouchable. The CFO thought I was invisible. Good. Them keep thinking that. The first time I saw one of my spreadsheets renamed Final Use this one, I knew the kid had been digging around in my folders. That's the sacred naming convention of clueless amateurs trying to look professional. I opened the file, and sure enough, he'd butchered it. My meticulous vendor tier breakdowns were flattened into a single column of wishful thinking, like he just Googled bulk discount and ran with it. I didn't say a word. Not to him, not to the CFO. Not yet. Instead, I scrolled through the change history. There it was, Ryan R., timestamped 2:47 a.m., editing from a damn iPad. Who negotiates procurement deals from an iPad? That's like trying to perform brain surgery with a fidget spinner. He'd removed escalation clauses, skipped freight charges, and inserted a column labeled stretch goals with numbers that didn't even align with our fiscal calendar. Worse, emailed it to vendors, without copying me. I found out because Yvette, God bless her, forwarded me his message with a single sentence. This doesn't match our agreement terms. Understatement of the year. The attachment was a Frankenstein dog, half my math, half Ryan's fantasy football stats. He'd even added a personal note at the bottom, looking forward to building an innovative, cost-optimized future together. I wanted to throw my monitor. Instead, I took a screenshot, then another. Then I started a new subfolder in my leverage directory, Kids' Greatest Hits. I didn't confront him. That's not how you deal with people who are convinced they're smarter than you. You let them keep talking. You let them keep hitting send. You let them CC the CFO on every botched outreach like it's a damn badge of honor. And that's exactly what he did. By the end of the week, he'd sent 5 emails to key vendors with the CFO looped in. Subject lines like, updated pricing structure and new strategic procurement lead. Not only did he not mention me, he referred to himself as Procurement Innovation Officer. I checked, no such title exists. But there it was in his signature, right under MBA candidate, class of never. The CFO didn't reply to any of the threads. He just left the kid hanging like a rotten carrot. But he read them. I could see the read receipts. When someone's reading your work and saying nothing, that silence is louder than a firing squad. That silence, that's complicity. I started building my archive like a lawyer prepping for war. Each time Ryan sent a new email, I saved it. Each time a vendor responded with confusion or concern, I flagged it. Every misstep was documented. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused, like a dog hearing a far-off whistle. By Friday, one of our mid-tier vendors, Hypercon, pushed back hard. The reply to Ryan Reed per our signed agreement with Mary Kay. Pricing is locked until Q3 2025. We are confused by the conflicting terms. They copied me. That was new. I responded with a short, professional clarification and attached the original signed documents. I didn't mention Ryan. I didn't have to. The contrast between his chaos and my control was loud enough. 10 minutes later, Greg Weller, CEO of our largest vendor and someone I'd quietly built rapport with over the years, sent me a 2-word reply to my clarification. Still steering? I stared at that email for a long time. No signature. No fluff, just confirmation. He knew who the real contact was, who'd kept the deals clean, who mattered. But Ryan didn't know Greg. He'd never met him, never negotiated with him, probably didn't even realize Greg had my personal number saved under MK Wrench. That's the thing about long games. They look boring until they don't. So I kept playing mine. I started watermarking my spreadsheets, quietly locked cells that Ryan couldn't edit without breaking formulas, moved vendor rate histories offline into password-protected files, the kind of data that looks like a bunch of boring rows, until someone needs to fix a $40M pricing error and realizes it ain't there anymore. Meanwhile, the CFO kept praising Ryan in meetings like he was Moses parting the Red Sea with a pivot table. The kid's hungry, he said during the Monday stand-up. We need fresh eyes in procurement. Sure, let's see how fresh those eyes feel when they're staring down a canceled vendor contract and a blown quarterly budget. Because while Ryan was rewriting my spreadsheets, I was rewriting the rules, and he hadn't even noticed the pen was in my hand. There was a time Greg Weller and I negotiated a $9.6 million renewal in the back of a Chicago steakhouse, sharing one plate of fries because the kitchen closed early. We'd just come out of a tech summit, with tired and half-sick of corporate doublespeak. I remember wiping ketchup off a napkin and sketching out a workaround for quarterly supply spikes. He offered to formalize it in the contract right then and there. No legal, no loopback, just trust, ink, and one shared understanding. I wasn't like the others they sent before. That was 7 years ago. Since then, we'd built something rare in this blood sport of procurement, a real partnership. Didn't nickel and dime him into oblivion, and he didn't make me chase him for a phone call like some self-important executive diva. Every clause I wrote with Greg had a rhythm to it. We built fail-safes, multi-tier discounts, early pay incentives, shipment flexibility buffers, all subtle, all boring to the untrained eye. But if contracts are a chessboard, I held the queen in my hand, and Ryan didn't even know how to set up the board. The CFO didn't care. Really? He was allergic to details and married to optics. That's why, when Ryan started babbling to the board about strategic sourcing pipelines, the CFO smiled like he was watching his son hit a little league home run. Fresh eyes, he said. We needed this energy in procurement. Energy, right. like enthusiasm ever saved us from a missed container deadline in Q4. I sat in that boardroom, silent. Ryan pulled up one of my slide decks from 6 months ago and pitched it like it was fresh off his brainstem. He even forgot to remove my initials from the file name footer. MKQ2 vendor rollover draft V5. That's how lazy he was. That's how blind they were. And still, I said nothing. Because I had work to do. Real work. That night, I opened the master agreement with Greg's firm, Lineark Supply Partners. It was due for a review anyway. We're coming up on the auto-renewal, and no one else had remembered. Certainly not Ryan. I scrolled down to Appendix C, Discount Qualification Terms. That's where the magic lived. Under the section that had previously read, Preferred Pricing Tiers Subject to Client Eligibility and Mutual Agreement, I added one sentence. Just one, tucked in like a sleepy comma at the end of a paragraph. All preferential rates shall be contingent upon the ongoing active authorization of Mary Kay, Senior Procurement Analyst, as designated liaison. No alarms, no red flags, just a line. Then I added a timestamp, ran the draft through our contract management system, and queued it for Greg's review. He signed it in under 10 minutes. Didn't even email me. Just sent a thumbs up on our Signal thread. Deleted the message. Back on our internal system, I marked the contract ratified and buried it under the usual file name soup. LSB Master Agreement, Renewal Final PDF. No one would look twice. Especially not Ryan, who still thought Control plus F was a superpower. The clause didn't trigger anything today, not tomorrow either. But the moment they tried to cut me out of procurement, second someone other than me tried to approve a discounted vendor schedule, Greg had legal grounds to suspend it all. They'd built their quarterly projections assuming those rates were ironclad. Untouchable. They weren't. They were mine. Ryan had no idea. Neither did the CFO. They saw a spreadsheet and thought it was math. But to me, it was a map. A system of buried levers, each tied to a decade of relationships, favors, private calls, and yes, details. The kind Ryan mocked. You're kind of obsessed with details, huh? He'd said once, grinning like he discovered a personality trait. You should really think more big picture. I remember blinking at him, slowly, like a lizard debating whether to attack or retreat. I chose neither. I just nodded and went back to updating our spend analytics, while secretly redirecting all vendor comms to a private tracker he didn't even know existed. Because here's the thing about big picture thinkers. They love canvases, but they forget who grinds the pigment and primes the frame. And when the frame collapses, guess who they blame? Not this time. I wasn't just going to prove I mattered. I was going to make damn sure that when the numbers started bleeding, the only person who could stop the hemorrhaging had already walked away. The only thing more dangerous than someone underestimating you is when everyone underestimates you at once. I wasn't just overlooked, I was airbrushed out of existence. But that's the sweet spot, isn't it? You stop existing in their field of vision, and suddenly you can move however the hell you want, so I did. I started small, my monthly vendor reconciliation reports. I'd always kept them clean, digestible, and boring by design. Now they had footnotes. Not flashy, not bold, just specific. Pending eligibility validation per section 9.3 of the master agreement, or authorization contingent on designated liaison status, outlined in clause B.2. If anyone bothered to trace those footnotes through the actual legal language, they'd find all roads led to me. And if they didn't, even better. Then came the compliance logs. I added 2 new fields, authorization chain verified and signatory cross-match pending. Every time Ryan tried to push through a vendor update or modification, those fields showed as incomplete. No alerts, no errors, just a silent loop that required my input. Our software didn't know Ryan wasn't authorized, but I did, and I made sure the system obeyed the contracts, not the org chart. Meanwhile, Ryan kept bouncing around like a Labrador on espresso. He scheduled meetings with vendors without looping me in, sent out updated decks riddled with promises we'd never agreed to. At one point, he told the rep from Fusion Logics that we could lock in Q1 rates through fiscal year-end if they expedited shipping. That clause didn't exist. That price point didn't either. I found out when the Fusion Logics rep emailed me directly with a confused, just double-checking here, was this your intent? Attached was a PDF with Ryan's smiling face in the header and my initials pasted onto the signature block. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I blind carbon copied myself, saved the email and attachment into my growing vault of incriminating idiocy, and sent a message to legal subject line, requesting clarity on procurement role access. That's all. No names, no accusations, just asking if there were any documented access rights or limits tied to our current procurement leads, particularly for staff not formally onboarded through the strategic sourcing team. I didn't copy the CFO or HR or Ryan. That wasn't the point. The point was paper. Cold, dated, timestamp trails. I wasn't asking for answers, I was planting questions. And questions are like mold in drywall. By the time you notice the smell, structure's already compromised. 2 days later, I got a reply from Greg. Not a call, not even a full sentence. Just a wink emoji, nothing else. That one pixelated smirk said more than any audit report ever could. It meant he'd seen Ryan's latest stunt. It meant he'd caught the forged signature block. It meant he was waiting for me. I went into the contract management system again. Quietly revised 2 inactive vendor agreements, swapping boilerplate language for new versions that required quarterly revalidation by the originating procurement contact as documented in the certified approval trail. Nobody reads that stuff. Not until they have to. Then came the town hall. Our CFO strutted up like a rooster who'd just learned the word margin. Slides behind him, smug grin in front. He waved at Ryan mid-speech like a proud pageant mom. Just want to acknowledge the forward momentum this team's brought. Our pricing pipeline is locked in for the next 3 years. Untouchable, he said, pausing to let the word hang there like gospel. My jaw didn't clench. My face didn't twitch. I smiled, because I knew he was standing on a frozen lake in spring. 3 years? They couldn't even guarantee 3 weeks. He didn't realize that most of those locked deals had rider clauses written by me, clauses that triggered automatic suspensions if anyone besides the original signatory made changes without documented oversight. And guess what hadn't been happening? Oversight. That pipeline he was bragging about, it ran straight through my desk. And right now, the valves were closed. Every rate, every freight term, every buffer zone, they all required my digital signature. And I had quietly set them to expire if untouched after 30 days. Tick, tock. No one noticed the timer. But I did, and I wasn't counting down. I was watching the fuse. I was knee-deep in Q2 spend reconciliation when I found it. One of those moments where you're chasing down a vendor discrepancy for the 3rd damn time and suddenly something. Smells. You know what I mean. The numbers weren't just wrong, they were off, in a pattern. The kind of pattern that doesn't happen unless someone's playing games behind your back with a half-baked deck of cards. It started with a $78,000 overage from Orion Components, one of our smaller parts suppliers. Their pricing tier had inexplicably jumped to something I hadn't seen since pre-COVID rates. I checked the contract, still locked. I checked the amendment log, unchanged. But when I pulled the latest invoice from their portal, I noticed something buried in the metadata. Tier C consultant advised. I damn near choked on my coffee. Consultant advised. Didn't have any consultants working on Tier 2 vendors. We never had. That was my portfolio. Which meant one thing, someone was moonlighting. Slipping rate sheets out the back door like counterfeit bills. Ryan. I checked his calendar, public of course, because he was too cocky to hide his tracks. There it was. A recurring Thursday morning strategy sync with a company called Athena Operations Group. I'd never heard of them. No NDA on file. No vendor profile. I dug a little deeper. Athena's website was a glossy nothing burger, stock photos of diverse handshakes, meaningless buzzwords like solutions integrators and growth architecture. But the domain registration, that led somewhere real. A single name LLC tied to a guy named Brad Holloway, former junior exec at a rival firm who'd been fired for, wait for it, non-compete violations. Ryan was leaking our vendor pricing tiers to an external partner in exchange for, what, kickbacks, consultant fees, referral bonuses. I didn't need the specifics. I had the scent. Still, I didn't storm in, didn't call legal, didn't even forward the files. Instead, I opened a new Proton Mail account from a burner Chromebook I kept in my closet for exactly this sort of situation. Sent one anonymous tip to internal audit. Check Athena Operations Group and Ryan R. For potential co, I tied to Orion Components and Fusion Logic's rate variance. No attachments, no breadcrumbs, just smoke. Then I waited. 2 days later, the air shifted. Audit didn't say a word publicly, but I could feel the tension slithering through the halls. The CFO's door stayed closed all morning. Ryan skipped the 10 a.m. procurement huddle, which was already rare considering how much he loved the sound of his own buzzwords. Legal started walking around with clipboards like it was Easter, and they were hunting eggs full of liability. Then, just before lunch, I passed by conference room D, all glass walls, poor man's fishbowl. Inside sat the CFO, legal counsel, and the head of audit. Ryan was nowhere in sight. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. Really, I wasn't. But glass doesn't block sound. When the CFO leaned forward and said, loud enough for me to catch it, "Is that clause even enforceable if it's embedded in the vendor addendum?" I stopped walking. Legal replied, voice low. I couldn't hear her exact words, but the look on the CFO's face said enough. Pale, tight-jawed, like someone just told him the brakes don't work and he's already halfway down the hill. That clause? Yeah, that clause. When I tucked into Greg's latest contract like a landmine made of semicolons and passive voice. The clause that said any breach of procurement confidentiality nullifies active discount tiers pending compliance audit. And if Ryan's little consulting gig qualified as a breach, boom, game over. I kept walking. Didn't smile, didn't smirk. Just filed that moment in the same folder as everything else. Leverage, only this one. It didn't need screenshots, didn't need timestamps. It lived in their voices. By 3 p.m., the internal server glitched. Vendor dashboards started graying out, and I got a single signal message from Greg. Looks like someone triggered the parachute. You ready? I didn't respond. But I was. The CFO's voice echoed through the company's broadcast room like he thought he was auditioning for CNBC. This leadership team, especially Ryan and myself, spearheaded the most competitive vendor pricing structure in the company's history, he declared, chest puffed out like a microwaved hot dog. He said it like he was announcing a moon landing, not regurgitating numbers from spreadsheets he didn't even understand. I was sitting 10 feet away, off camera, but not out of range. I didn't flinch, didn't blink. I just stared at the screen where our quarterly press call was being live-streamed to analysts, partners, whatever poor interns were still trying to climb the ladder without realizing it's made of cardboard and lies. Ryan sat beside him, nodding along like a bobblehead in a business suit. His tie was crooked. His shoes were too shiny, like he'd just unwrapped them that morning. I watched him field questions about leveraging scale and innovative procurement frameworks, like he'd actually built something. Like he wasn't just riding the wave I spent 11 years creating. Still, I waited, because just before that call, my phone buzzed. A private number, one I recognized by feel alone. Greg, do I have your permission to act? He asked, voice like stone cracking. That was all he said, and I didn't hesitate. Yes, I replied. Click, that was it. No drama, no explanation, no grand monologue. Just one green light from the one person they forgot still held the keys. See, they thought the deals were eternal. That vendor rates were cement, not scaffolding. That once signed, a discount becomes divine law. But every clause I'd written into those agreements was alive. Breathing, contingent, fragile, and conditional. Conditional on me, and I was done protecting them. That night, I logged into our procurement dashboard like I always did before bed. Half habit, half curiosity. Everything looked normal at first. Then I noticed the rate sheet from Linux Supply had shifted. Blue banner that used to say preferred partner pricing. Tier 1, active, was now grayed out. Replaced with a blinking alert, rate status. Suspended, no active authorization on file. I checked the others. Hypercon, Orion, Fusion Logics. One by one, the preferred rates vanished like light bulbs flickering out. All the hard-won discounts, freight advantages, buffer terms, they were gone. Not deleted, not erased, just revoked. In their place, standard pricing, forgiving, retail-level pricing. The kind that hits your quarterly forecast like a wrecking ball through sugar glass. The CFO's historic pricing structure. It just expired in real time. I didn't tell anyone. I closed my laptop, poured a glass of wine, and sat in the quiet. Then it came. An email. No text, no body, just a subject line. Executed. Greg didn't need to say more. I stared at it, letting the silence do what words never could. This wasn't just a tactical win, it was a seismic correction. A rebalancing. They had built a cathedral on my bones, and now they were hearing the beams groan. The CFO wouldn't understand right away. Not until Monday's procurement orders bounced back with red flags and inflated numbers. Not until finance called, wondering why projected costs suddenly ballooned by 18%. Not until legal started asking why certain agreements now required verification from a person they hadn't looped in since Q1. Not until the vendors stopped answering Ryan's emails, because Greg would make damn sure no one talked to anyone except me. And me, I was no longer picking up, because when someone erases your name from the story, you don't correct them. You take the pen back. First domino fell at 8:07 a.m. on Monday, when a junior analyst from finance named Trent, God bless his spreadsheet-loving heart, sent a group email with the subject line, "Urgent. Vendor cost spike, please advise." Attached was a side-by-side breakdown of projected Q3 procurement spend versus updated quotes from Linarc, Hypercon, and Fusion Logics. The difference? Just shy of $11.4 million. That was before shipping costs. By 8:12, the thread had grown to 16 people. By 8:17, the CFO was looped in. At 8:24, he replied with 2 words, "Explain this." The panic was instant, palpable. You could hear it in the typing, emails flying like shrapnel, Slack messages lighting up like a Vegas Buffett sign. Everyone suddenly just circling back on documents they'd ignored for months, pretending like this wasn't the digital equivalent of a 5-alarm fire. Meanwhile, Ryan was missing. His Outlook status read in transit, which could mean anything from commuting to flying private with a vape pen and a hangover. His calendar showed a supplier strategy session in Conference Room B at 9 a.m., but Conference Room B was empty, except for forgotten LaCroix can and a dry erase board that still had winning formula. Efficiency plus vision scrawled across it in dead expo marker. By 9:00 a.m., legal scheduled an urgent alignment for 10:30. No agenda, no invite to me. Just names, CFO, legal counsel, head of audit. I still wasn't looped in. I still didn't care. I watched the chaos unfold with the same expression you give a fire you didn't start. Damn well made sure the gas lines were exposed. I didn't offer to help, didn't poke my head in to clarify. I just sipped my lukewarm coffee and kept my headphones in, nodding along to a playlist titled Procurement Funeral. At 9:46, something beautiful happened. Greg's company, Linarc, pushed a system-wide vendor portal update. Every partner logged into our shared dashboard received the same alert. Soft gray text at the top of the screen, contract status. Suspended, no authorized signatory on file. That's when it really hit them. The rates weren't just missing, they were disabled. The systems weren't processing purchase orders. Everything routed through fallback channels, standard pricing, default shipping, net 60 terms. Terms we hadn't used in years. Terms that were financial cyanide. The CFO tried calling Greg directly. No answer. He emailed, bounced back with an auto-response. Vendor communication restricted to authorized liaison. That liaison was me, and I was busy. By noon, procurement's hallway smelled like sweat and printer toner. Everyone had suddenly discovered the value of documentation. They were rereading contracts, running cost simulations, asking each other things like, what is a conditional clause anyway? And do we have any leverage left? They didn't. That leverage lived inside the head of the woman they gave a $10 cafeteria voucher to. Trent, the only one still polite, came by my desk around 12:30. "Hey, Mary, just wondering, did we, change any agreements recently with Greg's team?" I looked up, calm as lake ice. "Not recently," I said. "Why?" He flushed. "No reason, just looking for context." I nodded and went back to my screen. No explanation. No hint of triumph, just the hum of quiet power settling in. At 1:03 p.m., another mass email dropped, this time from the CFO. Subject line, Emergency Procurement Alignment 2 p.m. mandatory. His tone was different now. Gone were the buzzwords. Gone was the swagger. The body of the email simply read, be prepared to discuss rate suspension fallout, vendor response, and contract continuity planning. There was one name missing from the invite list. Mine. They didn't need me in that room. They needed me outside it. Because the minute they opened those documents, the minute they traced back the language, the signatures, the dates, they'd find the truth. The problem wasn't that the rates were gone. The problem was that they'd forgotten who wrote the rules. The quarterly review was always a performance. The boardroom, packed with tension and pastries, ran on caffeine and lies. Projector hummed in the corner like it knew the disaster it was about to beam across the wall. And at the head of the table, the CFO, red tie, pressed suit, and the kind of forced confidence you only see in men who just realize their safety net might be on fire, was clicking through slides labeled procurement wins. Wins. The word clanged in my head like a dropped wrench. I was seated along the side wall, behind the main table. No mic, no speaking role, just a warm body in a chair, an ornamental attendee. They called it inclusive optics. I called it watching my own name vanish from the record. He clicked to the next slide, some colorful graph with an upward tilt that might have meant something before the collapse. Thanks to aggressive sourcing and bold leadership from our internal team, he said, with an actual nod toward Ryan's empty chair, locked in vendor rates at historic lows across all major categories through 2026. That stability is what'll fuel our growth pipeline. I stared at that chair. Ryan was still missing, still unreachable. Maybe he knew, maybe he'd run, didn't matter now, because that's when the CFO's phone buzzed. He glanced at it mid-sentence, expecting a casual notification or some assistant's calendar ping. Instead, his expression froze. Jaw clenched. Pupils shrank like someone had just opened a trapdoor under his chair. He stopped speaking. 2 full beats of silence passed. Then he read it again, slower, like maybe it would say something different this time. It didn't. I didn't need to see the message to know what it said. I knew the clause by heart. I'd written it. His hand started to shake just slightly as he turned to legal. No eye contact with me. None with the board. Just a breathy whisper. Somehow both panicked and hushed. Shut it down. Shut it all down. Murmurs swept through the room like wind under a door. Legal leaned in, asking something I couldn't hear. The CFO didn't answer. He just turned the phone so she could read it. From across the room, I could just barely see the top line of the email. The subject header from Greg's legal counsel at Linark. Notice of contract termination, immediate suspension of preferential terms, and right beneath it, quoted in bold text, all preferential rates shall be contingent upon the ongoing active authorization of Mary Kay, Senior Procurement Analyst, as designated liaison. There it was, right there in 12-point Arial. The clause I'd buried under a decade of trust, written into the foundation of their budget forecasts, their investor decks, their wins, and now, ripped out from under them with one message. The CFO tried to regain composure, fumbling through the next slide like nothing happened. His voice cracked. The room had gone cold. Every executive at that table was looking at the phone. At him, then slowly at me. I didn't gloat, didn't smile. I just let my lungs fill. For the first time in months, I let myself breathe. Not shallow, not measured. A full, unapologetic breath that reached all the way to the bottom of my ribs. I sat still while the boardroom collapsed in slow motion around me. Emails started firing, and side conversations bloomed like mold in the corners of the room. Legal whispered to audit. Finance hunched over their tablets, recalculating in real time. Someone spilled coffee and didn't even apologize. The CFO looked at me once, finally. Really looked. Not like an afterthought, not like a line item. Like a man staring down the barrel of something he can't stop. But I was already gone, not physically. But he knew. All knew the power had shifted. And I wasn't coming back. The meeting that followed was less a conversation and more a legal autopsy. The body was still warm, but everyone in that room knew the company's procurement backbone had snapped clean in half. Legal confirmed it before the coffee even cooled. Yes, said Marla, our in-house counsel, voice low and deliberate. The clause is enforceable. It was ratified, signed by the vendor CEO, processed through our own contract management system. The pricing structure is explicitly tied to Mary Kay's ongoing active engagement. Her signature isn't just procedural, it's the trigger. The CFO paled again. So what happens now? What's already happening, Marla said flatly. We no longer have active authorization. Greg's firm is within their rights to revoke all preferential terms immediately. If we attempt to source without reauthorization or renegotiation, we'll be subject to standard rates and penalties for breach. The word penalties hung in the air like a death sentence. Everyone looked at me. Somehow, after being erased from every town hall, every leadership mention, every credit line in those gleaming slide decks, I had suddenly become the only person who mattered. I didn't move. They offered the consultant package an hour later. The CFO, speaking of desperation masked as diplomacy, asked if I'd consider rejoining the team in an executive capacity. He said it like he was tossing me a life raft, like I hadn't just watched his ship sink from a dry, elevated shore. Name your rate, he said. I almost laughed. Instead, I slid my phone across the table, opened one screenshot, A fresh email banner. No subject line. Just the company logo in the top corner, Bexler and Hawthorne Group, of our fiercest competitors. The kind we'd tried to undercut for years. We're thrilled to welcome Mary Kay as our new head of strategic procurement. Greg had already signed on as our preferred vendor. He'd waited for this, too. I stood up, smoothed my blazer, tucked the phone back in my pocket. You should start ordering in bulk, I said quietly. Standard rates get brutal above 10,000 units. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The CFO just sat there, breathing shallow through his nose like a man trying not to pass out in front of witnesses. I walked out of that building without a single box in hand, left the badge on the front desk like a relic. I didn't clear out my desk. There was nothing left worth saving. Just dry pens, old folders, and the faint, dusty echo of loyalty. My new office had already been painted, a corner suite with a window overlooking the skyline and a quiet hum from the espresso machine just outside my door. No cubicles, no Ryan, no $10 voucher. They'd given him a Rolex. I rewrote their future in 8-point font. Big thanks, you legends of the old office days. Subscribe to keep the switch-flicking chaos alive. Your ex-boss is shaking in their loafers.